Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you're a sales professional, not in sales, but interested in helping people solve problems, or a founder CEO who's looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. This is Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale. I'm excited to have Dan Cilley and Stephen Wright from Vendor Neutral on the podcast this week. Dan's the co-founder of Vendor Neutral. Stephen is the Certification Analyst. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here.
Awesome. So Vendor Neutral is an awesome name. Can you guys give us a little bit of background on why Vendor Neutral? Why was that name important for you, and how'd you come up with it?
Thanks, Mike. Well, from my perspective, Vendor Neutral really speaks to what we're all about. We are truly vendor neutral. It's our mission to truly simplify the sales tech selection or sales tech identification and selection process for buyers at all levels. We offer that through a lot of free resources, including our sales tech buying assessments based on your priorities. Also, many category-focused scorecards and frameworks and vendor product profiles and reports that buyers can access at no cost and help them on their own sales tech buying journey. Our analyst, Stephen Wright, is really an important part of this organization, and he is our overarching authority surrounding our Vendor Neutral Certified 100 landscape. And also, he's developed all these profiles and reports that we're helping and utilizing in our process. And also, as we develop new categories, Stephen's compiling additional data so that we can really help buyers narrow down the solutions and how they actually affect the stakeholders within their organization.
Awesome. And Stephen, your role inside the organization and kind of the focus and where you point the lens. Can you describe that for the group?
Yes. So key thing is for every category that we're looking at and every vendor that we talk with and engage with, I'm really focused on developing very detailed questionnaires and doing the research to say, what does a solution in this particular category actually do? What's typical for offerings in the space and getting down to a great level of detail. In fact, it's something vendors complain about. I didn't know it was going to be this detailed. But that's part of the point, to really demonstrate that we can understand and offer to buyers a very neutral view of what are typical functions for solutions in any particular category, free from the marketing hype, free from the fluff, to be able to say this is what they really do. And it's interesting in a couple of ways. One, it's remarkable to me how honest vendors are about what they do and what they don't do. But it's also interesting when they say, well, this actually serves as a good competitive review about what's going on in the space. And when we get that all down to those 2-page profiles, they are dense. They are packed with information that really focuses on the functional capabilities of a particular product, as well as the challenges that a vendor believes that they address based on our list of set challenges and capabilities that ties to the needs and all of that are also surfaced in the buyer assessments to be able to do a better job matchmaking vendors with buyers, but also looking at what they think are the KPIs, measurable KPIs that they deliver, and then back into that detailed level of function to say, what is it you actually do?
Awesome. And so there are a couple things that you guys have said, and as the audience is listening in, as you're listening in out there, you realize you can start to see why both Dan and Stephen are on the podcast. Data, research, framework, scorecard, all items that you've heard multiple times on the podcast. And these things help us with our decision-making process. They help us with through evaluation. So it's great to hear folks talk about a practical framework or some practical ideas on how you connect the dots between, let's say, a technology that exists out there in the marketplace that solves a problem and a problem that exists out there in the marketplace that is either known or unknown. So can you guys go through and just talk through when organizations come to work with you, what are some of the core challenges that they're trying to address? Like, why do they come to you and say, guys, I need help?
Well, it's a great question, Mike. Normally, we're not just dealing with one area of the market and not one level of buyers. Our resources are available to any buyer at any level, whether you're SMB or you're an incredibly large enterprise. We're about giving you the tools that you need to make your selection, to identify the right resources. So we have our assessments. They're buyer-facing, like I said, at all levels. Buyer comes in, they take our assessment, and they are immediately aligned to the vendors and solutions based primarily on their priorities and their challenges. And that's a unique strategy that we follow. And then, once we have that understanding, we know which vendors, and then we can start to help the buyer understand their own process. And that's really the first step, because it's not about tech. It's not about starting with technology. It's about understanding your own process, understanding your own internal organization. So we give a lot of DIY resources to our buyers at the SMB and mid-market level, but the buyers at the large mid-market or enterprise level that engage with us directly, we do offer a direct consulting resources. And the same methodology or the same frameworks are utilized. Instead of it being a DIY strategy, it's more hands-on. And it kind of is reflected in what we call our S.T.A.C.K framework. So it's S.T.A.C.K, and starts off with S being our stakeholder analysis. So really understanding who's going to help hinder or potentially even hurdle the opportunity or project forward in the organization. And then we take a look at the technology, right? What do they currently have? What infrastructure is in place? What's being used? What's not being used? And that's also where A comes in. So it's an audit of an understanding of, are we using this tech that we have? Is it siloed in a certain department? A lot of opportunity there to understand and to see if there's budget or ROI opportunities as well. And then we focus on the challenges and the capabilities within the organization. And we try to match the two. So again, an organization may have a lot of desire to bring on the latest tech or solution, but the fact is that their capabilities may not align to that. So they may be more prone for the Pinto, not the Ferrari. So we understand that, and we try to align the technology that is going to best suit their needs. And if there's still a desire out there to still look at that Ferrari, we also have a lot of resources, consulting resources that we can help implement to get them to that goal, whether it's training or change management or resources that are going to get them across that finish line so they can bring the technology in. And then K being know the questions to ask. And we not only help our buyers or our prospects understand the questions they need to ask vendors, but we really help them understand the questions they need to ask themselves. Good. So these are the questions that internally, you have to ask your finance department, your sales department, your customer success department, and you need to get the answers, because that's what's going to really lead to the best alignment of a sales tech solution for your organization.
Yeah, so what are some of those questions that we can start with? So, as you're going through the evaluation process, what are some of as we think about internal questions that we should be asking in our organizations, where do we start?
Well, again, is there a senior leadership involvement? What are the people and processes necessary to extract value? That's a really important question. Another really important question is, will we need additional headcount? Is this something that's going to require growth in our organization, or should each stakeholder be involved long-term? Each stakeholder needs to be identified. They need to understand their potential influence on the process, but do they need to be involved in the entire process? And then, we also look at how will we measure success, or how does it good look? Because that's probably one of the most important questions is, what does good look like? And if we can answer that internally, then we're probably 50%, 60% of the way to understanding our path to identifying the technology.
And then, Stephen, when you see this happening in the marketplace, where are the places that, or why do folks struggle with these questions? Because these tend to be pretty, for want of a better term, basic questions. I mean, these are standard things that you'd like to think that we're asking about, whether we're talking about making a purchase to bring something new into our house, or we're making a purchase to bring something new into our business. These are kind of who, what, why, where, when. Stephen, why do folks struggle with these?
I think they struggle on a couple of different fronts. One is, when you're looking at yourself, it's sometimes hard to establish a certain distance to determine where the problems really are.
Yep.
You kind of know where things feel and where things hurt, or, gee, I wish people did more of this, or marketing wants them to be more aligned with that. But really stepping back and trying to take a look at, what is your actual sales process? What is the actual customer journey? Where do people engage? When should sellers get engaged? What are the steps you expect them to do? What are the range or the volume of actions they're supposed to take, whether that's making phone calls, whether that's engaging with email, whether that's sending content, whatever it is. What is it that they actually, you want them to do? And also, what is it that they are actually doing? And do you even know? So sort of being able to divide things up into, what you know, and understanding what you don't know, and understanding there are things you haven't even thought about yet. is a difficult thing to do when you're down in the weeds or you're stuck in the woods and trying to get a view of the forest. So that's one of the things that I think we can help with. I think the other thing is, another area is in technology, a cliche, but there's a lot of bright, shiny objects out there. It sounds great, but what is it you're going to actually have to do to understand the impact to your organization, to change the culture, or the work you're going to have to do to really make sure that you can use that tool? Just having the tool isn't the same thing as having the results. It's what are you putting into it to make sure that it's going to work? It's
important to kind of go through that process of saying, so what? So what? What is the impact? So what? How will we pull these things? How will we pull these things together? And I think one of the other things that I've seen out there, again, I want to validate that this is something, if this is something you guys are seeing, but there's many times where we kind of feel like just action is good. Like just doing things for the sake of doing things demonstrate that we're actually moving forward, where we might end up finding that we're moving ourselves, we're running on a treadmill or we're walking around in circles. Is there a tendency for people to kind of move toward, if I'm taking these actions, then that means I'm actually making progress, when the reality is they're not advancing the organization?
I think there's a great chance of that. One of the things that's very common with a lot of sales tech tools is they can capture a lot of data if they're being properly used. A lot of data about what sellers are doing, what things are working, a lot of potentially powerful analytics. But I have found in my experience, once they buy something and start using it and getting the data, a lot of practitioners are not always so good at actually using that data, even though it's very powerful and they're in the tools. And that's something I've had a discussion about with a lot of practitioners and with a lot of vendors about, great, now that you've got a basis to decide some of your actions, are you actually going to use the data you're gathering to do that, and not just to do the, well, marketing took credit for this, or sales can demonstrate the volume of activities is that, but what are the actual results and what's really working? And are you willing to take that information to keep making the sort of iterative changes to have a continuous performance and improvement process to take action based on that? And I'm not sure people think about that as far as they should. They think, well, I'll just flip the switch and it'll work, and sales will go up, and that's all I need to prove that I did what I needed to do.
It's amazing how often we forget to think.
Yeah, I sometimes use that as a phrase, data everywhere, but nary a stop to think.
That's awesome. Well, and as you were going through your description there, I was kind of thinking back, and and I've said this many times before, but it took me moving into a sales management role before I found Salesforce religion. I was the rep that was out there who would perform on an annual basis, but wouldn't put information into Salesforce because I didn't need it. It didn't help accelerate my progress. It didn't add to the thing that I was doing. Now, the blind spot on my side was I wasn't concerned as much about how that was impacting things on the management side of the business, or how that was potentially creating additional risk, or how it was even creating additional work. I would just deliver things. And then I started leading a team and realized, I need the data in order to be able to put together an accurate forecast. And in order to put together an accurate forecast, I need the data to be accurate. In order for the data to be accurate, I need to make sure it's easy for people to deliver. And it just, there's this, the reason I went down that path is because there's this kind of analysis that we've got to go through. Maybe it's a root cause analysis, as we kind of design to address a specific need that's happening inside the organization. And when you talk about, Dan, when you talked about it on the front end, the stakeholder alignment, do you find that stakeholders are aligned, that they're easy to get in front of, that sometimes they just don't understand the value behind this thing, so it's hard to get those stakeholders together? What are some of the challenges with stakeholder alignment?
So I think that's an excellent question. And I believe that each stakeholder is going to look at the project in a different way, and they're going to influence it in a different way. But the common question between all of them is, how will we measure success?
Okay.
Right, from their point of view. And I honestly, I feel that that's probably the most important question each stakeholder should be asking, whether it's involving their marketing, in a marketing role, and they're potentially driven in a dual quota responsibility with sales, or is it an operations role when they're responsible for bringing the technology and the resources to enable this success? Or is it at a senior leadership level when they're demanding all of this data and they're demanding all of this information? So I feel that from every different perspective is a different insight required. And really an important part of, again, what we do as well is we take the time to truly understand each of those roles. And it may take a half a day, it may take a couple days sometimes to get to that goal. But once we do have that understanding, we understand their position or their role in the process, we're able to really get them to the end goal a lot quicker, because now we understand what's going to make a difference in their eyes.
Yeah, and it seems like, as you're describing it, that's an iterative process.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's really interesting as you're going through and describing it, and probably this is driven by the fact that these are people making decisions. But in the education tech space, we run into the same kind of challenges. The learning and development folks that are on listening, they'll know that there's always this shiny new thing from whether it's a learning management system or a learning experience platform, or it's AR, VR, or some other cool thing that's going to change the way that learning is delivered inside an organization. They are also challenged with these same ideas. How would you see these concepts also applying in that type of decision-making process when thinking about technologies outside of the sales tech space and starting to apply it in other technologies that we adopt in other aspects of our business?
Well, I think there's fundamental rules that apply to a lot of them. It's like, where does it hurt? What's not getting done now? What is working now? And particularly when you mention like learning, once you start dealing with content, it's like there's plenty of different ways to deliver, but the question is always going to be, what's the quality of the content that you're delivering that way? What's the way that best fits the audience and how they consume things? What's the development curve and the time it takes to build new material? And who are your subject matter experts? They may not be fabulous on the phone or on video, but where are you really getting the information, the knowledge that needs to be codified and put into a course and become measurable in some way, measure or form that can be used and consumed by the audience? Because I think for almost any technology, the question for the end user is this a carrot or a stick? Is this something that's being pushed upon me by management and I've got to do it because I've been ordered to do it? Or is this a tool that actually I can see some benefits accruing to me that encourages me to do it? Does it make my life better, or does it make my life more difficult?
Awesome. And it is the word that continues to be overutilized, or it seems like it's used ad nauseum, is empathy. And being able to put yourself in the shoes of those people that are impacted by it, whether they're internal customers or external customers. And when you're dealing with these enabling technologies, many times you're supporting internal customers. How does empathy mapping or empathy play a role in this process from your perspective, either Stephen or Dan?
I consider it to be incredibly important. We have to ask ourselves, what are the business or even the personal objectives this solution or solutions can help us with? And internally, it's a scenario where an employee, and especially an entry-level employee, SDRs, BDRs, and we're seeing this more often than not, they have plethora of resources. They have a plethora of technology, probably more technology at the top of the funnel than anywhere else. And these individuals are well respected in their ability to qualify an inbound prospect that comes through a lot of this technology. And then they have to then move it into a closing strategy, or they're handing it off to an account manager. In many cases, we're hearing this, and more often than not, is that emotional transfer, that you've now created a relationship with a buyer, you create a relationship with a prospect, that the reason why they're engaged with your company, and now you're just handing it over to an account manager that's supposedly going to close the opportunity. And I feel that what we have to start looking at more often than not is the emotional transfer. It's that buyer's journey, and ensuring that the buyer has confidence in the process. And maybe it's about that SDR, BDR continuing in the sales cycle, maybe being accompanied by an AE or a closing rep or a sales engineer that's going to help out. So I feel that it's we have to start to really rethink that emotional transfer and how that looks and how an organization is going to support a buyer's journey.
Yeah, it's amazing how that changes too, depending on if you're looking at it at that buyer journey or a customer decision-making process, or even your internal processes, how the perspective and the viewpoint shifts depending on which lens you use in the organization. Marketing might look at it one way. Sales might look at it another way. Product might look at it another way. And we tend to forget that we're all wearing that we have that same logo on our golf shirts if we still wear those, or t-shirts now at conferences, or in our email address we're using that same domain. And I know that this gets really complex as you get into larger organizations and you start to work with
the bigger
teams.
you get, the tougher it gets with the stakeholders and all of that. But I wanted to build a little bit on that empathy theme and what you were saying, Mike, and what Dan was saying. And there's a lot of focus a lot of companies have on what is the buyer journey, what is the customer journey, how do you make that frictionless, how do you make that easier, how do you simplify that, how do you reinforce that, over time, particularly to get that repeat business and everything like that. I think a lot of companies should invest some of that thinking and all of that and sort of say, what's the seller journey? What is the journey you want them to go through and how are they rewarded? And I mean, it could be sellers, it could be customer success.
Yep.
It could be any role that you identify, but what's the journey from beginning to maturity or to success? And how do you make that simpler? And how do you find tools that will enable their productivity or that can help them automate? They don't have to think about what I need to enter into Salesforce or any other system. It's entered for them because of it. So, how do you simplify that journey and applying some of that marketing intelligence and thinking about that and saying, okay, appeal to this audience and what they're doing. How would I deal with them as in terms of using a journey, and what are the internal resources I have to simplify their life or make it more productive and more actionable? And I don't think a lot of companies do that. It's sort of like, well, they're employees. We pay them to do stuff.
Well, and what's funny about it too, and I think this is a critical point for everybody. And I just, if you have to rewind and listen to that again, do so. This is when you start to look at, if you start to ask questions that you're asking your customers, if you start to ask those same questions or similar questions inside your business, it's amazing what you can uncover, because everybody is going through some kind of journey. Everybody is going through some kind of process. And there's some things that some patterns that you should be able to identify inside your organization that relate to those processes. And if you can identify those patterns and implement solutions to address challenges that reoccur within those patterns, you'll do what Stephen just described, which is reduce friction. We want to reduce friction for our customers. We also want to reduce friction for our sales team. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about customers from the perspective of both internal and external customers. I mean, anybody that you work with, anybody that you interact with in some way, shape, or form is someone that you're providing a level of service to, which ends up, turns them into a customer. Maybe it's a Pollyanna-ish or simplified way to look at things, but that's how I try to remind myself of those things. What do you guys think?
I think that's all very true. I think but it goes back to what's the process you're going to do to evaluate the processes that you're using that help do that. I think one thing that people forget is that any technology you bring in is automating something that originally could be done manually or person to person or without the intervention of technology. So if the question becomes, how do you scale up to the volume to be able to do more of that, to be able to do it faster, to be able to do it more efficiently? And if it's an unpleasant process manually, technology is only going to make it unpleasant but faster and more frequent.
And I have to agree, Stephen. When I think about the knowledge gap in an organization, right, and I think about representatives at early stages in their development and later stages of their development, and do they have the opportunity to leverage their peers, right? Now, their peers may be next door, maybe sitting next to them in their office, but more often than not, especially at these larger organizations, they may be on the other side of the world, and they may have already handled this scenario. They may have already dealt with this industry or this buyer's requirements or needs. And I think that that ability to connect the dots through knowledge sharing technology, through resources that are truly enabling the end user and the buyer, because now what we're doing is that end user now has access to resources, content, people that are going to help enable their success. And that truly is a differentiator through technology.
Yeah, and there are a number of different stories out there. And Doug Boucher, who is pretty active in the sales enablement space, he had shared a story before about the America's Cup and the idea that there was a period of time where they were hand cranking sales. And then someone came onto a team with a background in bicycle racing and said, why aren't we using foot cranks to do this? And the point to reinforce there, and reinforce Dan's point and Stephen's point, is you can learn so much by asking questions of others and realize that they may have gone through either a similar challenge or they've already figured out a way to solve that challenge. Guys, as we wrap up the discussion here, where can folks go to find out more about what you're working on within Vendor Neutral, the various resources that are available, that you make available to folks, and how best to work with you?
Thank you, Mike. So the easiest way is to visit www.vendorneutral.com. And as soon as you get to our site, you're going to see a step 1, 2, 3 strategy. Step 1 is take our priorities-based sales tools assessment. Step number 2, get your results, and you're going to see right out of the gate that your priorities and your challenges are going to align to a specific stack of resources, specific vendors and solutions. And then step 3, visit those profiles, visit those and download those reports on those vendors. They're free, they're available to buyers at all levels, and they really will simplify your sales tech selection process.
Awesome. Well, Dan, Stephen, thanks for joining the podcast. It was another great discussion. Please check out Vendor Neutral and the work that they're doing in the sales tech space. We'll include all links in the show notes. If you know somebody who'd benefit from hearing this discussion, please share it with them and let us know via LinkedIn or Twitter. I'd like to hear how you're applying the concepts and ideas inside your business and inside your role. Sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?